This video is brought to you by the Battle Zoo Bestiary, a new book with over 100 award-winning monsters and other resources from Paizo lead designer Mark Cypher. Sign up today at kickstarter.rollforcombat.com and join the campaign when it launches on August 31st. Hey everybody, Dave here with another Pathfinder rule reminder for you, and today we are going to continue our conversations about weapons and weapon reach by talking about tiny player characters. The Lost Omens Ancestry Guide introduced the first of the tiny size playable ancestries, which is the Sprite, and most of the rules for how combat and weapon reaches work apply to sprites and other tiny PCs the same as they do to small and medium-sized player characters, but there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of if you're playing a sprite or other tiny PC. The first of those things is that reach is going to be affected. Tiny PCs by default have reaches of 0, which mean they must be occupying the same space as the target that they wish to attack. So instead of being able to make attacks into adjacent squares, they can only attack into the square that they are occupying. The exception to that would be if they are carrying a reach weapon. So if they are carrying a reach weapon, like a long spear, that long spear has 5 fewer feet of reach when that weapon is designed to fit the hands of a tiny-sized creature. Meaning, a sprite carrying a long spear can use it to attack into any adjacent space, not just a target that is occupying the space that they're in. And it's worth mentioning that yes, sprites are able to freely occupy and move through the spaces of other creatures. But there is one thing to be aware of when you're dealing with sprites and them occupying the space of other creatures. Typically, when a creature is within the path of an attack, then the target of that attack gets the benefits of lesser cover. By default, sprites do not receive lesser cover from the creatures who space they're occupying, but with the GM's permission, they might be able to use the take cover action to gain cover from those creatures whose space they're occupying. And although tiny-sized weapons have the same cost and other characteristics of a small or medium-sized weapon of that type, they have half the bulk. But other than those elements being reach and bulk and the way lesser cover is handled for a creature being in the path of an attack, there really are no other changes to the way weapons work for small-sized player characters, and this can be a little bit of a point of contention for some players, because yes, those weapons that are tiny sized do the same amount of damage as their medium-sized counterparts. And yeah, that can be a point of contention for some groups. For some people, it infringes a little bit on their sense of realism for the game world, but that is the way the rules are designed. In my games, although this kind of does rub against a sense of realism a little bit, I kind of like the idea of heroic sprites who are doing heroic things just like their small and medium-sized counterparts. You might have to come up with some fun narrative explanations as to why that tiny sprite was able to lop off a monster's head or what have you. But to me and my players, that's kind of part of the fun of the game. But I do recognize that every table is different, every GM is different, and so what works for me and my players may not work for you and yours. So I'll just offer that if you are a GM that wants to place additional restrictions on tiny-sized PCs, one thing to consider, instead of messing with the mathematics and the mechanics that go into their damage, think about the cost of their gear. If sprites are a rare ancestry, then it follows reason that tiny size gear designed for these tiny size creatures would also be rare, and therefore you might want to look at charging a premium to be able to source and purchase tiny size weapons and other tiny size gear when the player characters are not in a sprite settlement, because again, it's going to be rare items and rare equipment. But that's it in a nutshell. In 2nd edition, they make it as simple as possible. Tiny size weapons work just like small and medium sized weapons, except they're half the bulk and they have 0 reach or 5 feet of fewer reach if it is a reach weapon like a long spear. As always, leave your suggestions for future rule reminders in the comments, and I'll make sure that I leave links to my other videos about reach and weapons and other related topics in the description of this video if you want more information. And as always, I want to take a moment to thank everybody out there who supports me in this channel, whether that's through leaving those comments and suggestions, by subscribing to the Patreon, liking this video, subscribing to my channel here. It all adds up, and I greatly appreciate everything you folks do to support me. And with that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.